On April 18, 1942, just 132 days after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, Tokyo was burning. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon when the first B-25 flown by the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders dropped its first bomb. The Japanese High Command and the civilian population was caught off guard. As the raiders approached the coast of Japan, they saw smiling civilians waving at them from fishing boats, beaches, and baseball parks. They were so convinced their island home was beyond the reach of the Allied bombers, they didn't imagine that danger was imminent, even though U.S. Army Air Corps bombers were screaming overhead, just above the treetops. It was one of the most brilliantly conceived operations in aerial combat history. All 16 Mitchell B-25s found their intended targets and delivered their payloads. What the enemy did not know was the Doolittle Raiders were nearly 12 hours and 250 miles early for their rendezvous with history. The USS Hornet and the B-25s had been spotted much farther out than their planned launch distance. Early this morning, 80 Doolittle Raiders had scrambled aboard their airplanes, knowing they did not have adequate fuel capacity to reach any safe haven. It was an act of valor rarely matched in modern military history. Before it was over, a despondent Jimmy Doolittle, not knowing the location or the fate of his gallant crews, would sit atop the wreckage of his airplane and predict his own court-martial. He didn't know the raid he had led would play a pivotal role in turning the tide of events in the Pacific in favor of the Allies. That he had, in fact, just completed a mission that would change the war. The Japanese were completely incensed by the Doolittle raid. They had been concerned that such a raid might originate in China. General Claire Chennault, head of the celebrated Flying Tigers who were operating in China, recalled that the Japanese drove 200 miles into East China to seek revenge. Chennault wrote, "One sizable city was razed for no other reason than the sentiment displayed by its citizens in filling up Jap bomb craters on nearby airfields. 250,000 Chinese civilians and soldiers were reportedly killed in the 3-month campaign." The Chinese had been at war with the Japanese since 1937. They knew well the brutality they employed against those who opposed them. Yet time and again, they risked all to try to help the lost American flyers get to their ultimate destination, the wartime capital of Chongqing. Since 1988, Melinda Liu has been the Beijing bureau chief for Newsweek magazine.
I think it's very hard for people of our generation to understand what our parents went through and the environment that they went through. That was a very special time. My father was basically like millions of other Chinese trying to get through the war, and just happened by happenstance to be in a certain situation that propelled him to heroic actions and very unusual circumstances, and it changed his life forever.
It began as a boost for the sagging morale of a shocked and angry nation. But the Doolittle raid turned out to be so much more.
And it looked like their next big step might be Australia, drive down and take over Australia. And that was just the time when we hit. And the Japanese decided they were going to put an end to that possibility in the future. And 6 weeks after our raid on Japan, they got together a huge fleet and headed across the Pacific. They had 4 carriers, they had cruisers and battleships, and they were going to take over Midway first, possibly Hawaii next. And our intelligence had broken their code, knew they were coming, and Halsey had our ship, the Hornet, and the Enterprise, the other carrier that was with us, and a 3rd carrier, the Yorktown, and he had us sitting up north of Midway and waiting. And when the Japanese struck Midway, we flew down there, and the rest is history, what happened. Our Navy boys sunk all 4 of those carriers, and it was a tremendous victory for our side. And from that time on, if you analyze the Pacific War, instead of being on the offensive everywhere, they were back on the defensive until we were just within easy striking distance of Japan in the summer of '45.
Following the Battle of Midway, the Japanese never scored another victory in the Pacific. In China, Jimmy Doolittle made a promise to his men.
Colonel Doolittle promised the group, he says, if we survive the mission, he says, I'm going to throw you the biggest party you've ever had after it's all over, after the war. Anyway, we had the first reunion, and everybody had a good time. It was all fun and games and so forth. And somebody said, why don't we do this again? And Jimmy said, hey, wait a minute, fellas. This cost me a pretty penny to have this party. He said, I can't afford to do it. And some of the other aviation interests sponsored and the city itself. And after that, it was kind of like Topsy. We began to receive invitations every year. Gentlemen, the toast to those who are gone. When we get together, it seems like the raid was yesterday. It's great to see the ones that are still living, and we pay homage to the ones that have passed on. The mysteriousness of the thing, the way it was designed was that in this case that holds goblets, there was a bottle of Courvoisier that was laid down the same year Colonel Doolittle was born. As the story goes, at the end of the trail, there'll be 2 raiders sitting together with their goblet and some of their Courvoisier in the cup. And that'll be the end of the Doolittle Raiders.
80 men. 68 years later, only 6 of them are still with us. Yet their tradition dictates that all 80 of them gather, either in body or spirit, every year on the anniversary of that heroic and historic mission. A mission that changed the war.